The sun burned bright over the red skies of planet Valgora. Dust storms swept across ancient stone ruins, where time had buried secrets older than any empire. But one thing remained untouched, an old sword, stuck deep inside a giant black rock. For over 1,000 years, it stood still. Many had tried to pull it out, giants, warriors, alien kings. None could move it even an inch. They said it was the sword of the last flame, forged in the heart of a dying star by the ancient ones. Some called it a weapon. Others called it a curse. And the oldest among the alien races whispered a prophecy. When the sword leaves stone by the hands of the weak, the stars will burn and the chained will rise. No one understood it. They just wanted the power. In the grand city of Veltari, hundreds of species had gathered around the stone. Every cycle, warriors came to try their luck. Some screamed. Some cried. Some even died trying. But the sword didn't move. Then one day, a storm came. The sky turned black. Thunder cracked like a whip. People ran to their homes. But through the blinding dust, a single figure stumbled across the valley alone. He was tall but thin, with strange clothes, covered in sand. His face was hidden behind a cracked helmet. He wasn't from Valgora. He wasn't even from this star system. He was a human. His name didn't matter to the aliens. To them, he was just the lost one, a nobody, a stranger, a weak outsider. He didn't come looking for the sword. He just needed shelter. As the wind howled louder, he spotted the giant stone altar in the middle of the ruin. He climbed the steps, coughing from the dust, his vision blurred. The heat burned his skin. He saw the sword. It was beautiful. Silver and black, glowing faintly with blue cracks running along the blade. Strange symbols moved slowly across its surface like water. It didn't look like a weapon. It looked alive. The human didn't know the legends. He didn't know about the prophecy or the alien kings who had failed. He was just tired. He leaned forward and placed his hand on the hilt to keep himself from falling. That's when it happened. The stone shook. A low hum echoed through the air. The runes on the sword flashed bright. The wind stopped. The sand settled, for the first time in 1,000 years. The sword moved. Not much, just a little. But enough. The human's hand flew back. He stepped away, confused. Did he imagine it? He wiped the sweat from his eyes. Behind him, a gasp. He turned. A dozen aliens had been watching from afar, just waiting for the storm to pass. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open. Did he move it? Someone whispered. A loud alarm rang out across the city. Guards appeared, drones flew down. And in minutes, the human was surrounded. He didn't fight. He didn't even understand the language. They bound his hands and dragged him to the city's upper chamber. All the way there, the sword stood glowing quietly in the rock, watching, waiting. In the golden halls of the High Council, leaders of many races met. Tall, short, armored, scaled, feathered, every kind of being sat in a giant circle around the human. He was forced to kneel in the center, bruised and silent. He moved the sword. A counselor hissed, "But he's just a human," another spat. "They're weak, primitive." "The prophecy," an old alien whispered. "The stars will burn, and the chained will rise." They argued. Some wanted to study the human. Some wanted him dead. Some wanted to break the sword. Fear was growing like fire in dry grass. But far away, watching through a broken stone wall, a small alien girl with silver eyes watched everything quietly. She wore torn clothes. Her hands were chained. She was just a slave, yet she smiled. "He touched it," she whispered. "It chose him." Back in his cold prison cell, the human sat alone, head down. He didn't know what he had done. He didn't know why everyone was afraid. But deep inside, he felt something, like a voice. Not in words, but in feelings. "You are not the strongest," it seemed to say. but you care. That is enough. Suddenly, a soft blue light filled the room. The sword had appeared in front of him. Floating dot, waiting dot, and this time it called him by name. Asterisk. The chamber was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. 12 alien counselors sat in their high thrones, each from a different world. Their eyes glowing, blinking, scanning, were all fixed on one thing. Not the sword, not the prophecy, but the human. He sat on the cold metallic floor, his wrists bound in glowing restraints, his face calm but confused. He didn't understand the alien words being shouted. He didn't know his name was now spoken in fear across planets. All he knew was, something strange had happened the moment he touched that sword. And now, everyone seemed afraid of him. This cannot be real, growled a reptilian warlord named Vaxer. His tail slammed the floor with rage. That weapon belongs to warriors, not a creature with no claws. We tested 1,000 champions, said another, a spider-like queen. It never moved. But this one, this human ... They showed holograms images of the sword shaking, glowing, responding to the human's casual touch. The blade hadn't done that for any of their strongest generals. One elder, older than most empires, leaned forward slowly. It has begun, he whispered. The one who does not kneel has arrived. A sharp silence followed. Even the guards shivered. Some counselors wanted to kill the human before the prophecy could unfold. Others said to study him, dissect him, pull the knowledge from his brain. One voice cut through them all, soft but full of command. Let him speak. The chamber doors opened. A tall figure entered, her skin glowing silver, her eyes deep as oceans. She was Sarai, the council's keeper of ancient knowledge. She walked to the center and looked at the human. You don't know what you've done, do you? The human didn't answer. He couldn't, so she stepped closer, kneeled, and placed her hand gently over his heart. The sword moves for the one who carries no pride. It moves for the protector, not the conqueror. The lights dimmed. A new image appeared above them, a glowing prophecy carved into a stone wall thousands of years ago. A shadowy figure pulled a blade from fire, not for power, but to protect the silent and suffering. Far away, in the slave district behind the main city walls, the young silver-eyed girl had not left her hiding spot. She knew something was changing. She had spent her whole life chained, beaten, ignored, one of many nameless servants to the ruling races. But when she saw the human touch the sword, her heart had jumped. Not from fear, but from hope. So now, she watched from afar. And when no one was looking, she drew the human's face in the dirt and whispered, "Please don't kneel." Back in the council tower, fear was spreading fast. The human was placed in a glass containment cell, floating high above the floor. Armed drones circled him. Even in his silence, the alien leaders were nervous. That night, something strange happened. The sword vanished. One moment it was stuck in the stone, the next, gone. Without flash or sound, security cameras failed. Alarm systems froze. And then there it was. Inside, the human cell, hovering, glowing, waiting. No one saw how it got in. No one could remove it. It floated just inches above his head like it had chosen him already, but he didn't reach for it. He simply stared until he heard something. A whisper, no, a presence. Do not lift me for glory, the sword seemed to say. Lift me only to protect. The cell lights flickered. The drones crashed down like toys. The bindings around his wrists burned off on their own, and in that moment, the human stood. The sword flew into his hand, like it had always belonged there. Chaos followed. The alarm screamed. Guards rushed in, but none dared enter, and in the city below, thousands of aliens saw a beam of light rise from the council tower, blue and gold. Like a rising star, some fell to their knees. Others began to chant a name that hadn't been spoken in 10,000 years. The Starbreaker has returned. The sword didn't feel like metal in his hand. It felt alive, warm, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. The human didn't understand why, but as soon as his fingers closed around the hilt, the noise of the world disappeared. The guards outside the glass cell stopped shouting. The alarms faded. Even the lights dimmed, as if the universe itself paused. And then everything went black. Suddenly, he wasn't in the cell anymore. He stood on an endless plain of stars. Galaxies floated like fireflies around him. He looked down and saw nothing. Beneath his feet, just the swirling void of space. Then came the voice. Not loud, but ancient. Not male or female. It sounded like a memory, echoing across time. You touched me with no hunger for power. That is why I chose you. The human turned. The sword was floating beside him, glowing brighter now, with streaks of gold joining the blue. Who are you? The human whispered. I am not a weapon, the voice said. I am a promise kept. And with that, the stars twisted. He saw visions. 1,000 years ago, before the council ruled, before the great cities, there was only war. Alien empires clashed, planets burned, and the weak were crushed. The sword was created in secret by an extinct race, the Mourners of Flame. They poured their memories, pain, and hopes into it. It was never meant for destruction. It was meant for protection, to serve the one who stood up when no one else did. But when the mourners died, the sword was hidden. And the prophecy was born. When chains return and cries go unheard, the sword will wake for the one who listens. The human saw it all, slaves crying in the dark, children torn from mothers, warriors laughing as they crushed villages. And then he saw himself, standing, alone, facing a wall of fire. He blinked. He was back in the cell. But not the same. The sword was still in his hand, humming quietly. Guards stared from behind reinforced glass, frozen in fear. Some whispered prayers. Others called him a threat, but one person didn't run. From a side tunnel, the small silver-eyed alien girl appeared. She had slipped past security. She had crawled through pipes, hidden behind machines, just to see him again. You're real, she whispered, stepping into the light. You saw the sword's truth, didn't you? The human knelt down, eyes soft. How do you know? He asked. The girl raised her chained hands. Because I dreamed of you. Since I was little. The one who would lift the sword not to rule, but to help. She reached into her torn clothes and pulled out something. A broken medallion, ancient, covered in dust. It had the same symbol that was on the sword's blade, a star within a flame. This belonged to my mother, she said. She said one day the blade bearer would return. And he would start with one small act of kindness. The human looked down at her chains. He didn't speak. He just raised the sword, and the chains cracked open like dried leaves. The girl gasped, then cried, not from pain, from something she had never felt before. Hope, far above them, the council was watching. They had seen enough. He's awakened the weapon, one counselor shouted. He's bonding with the slaves. If we wait, the people will rise. We must stop him now. A kill command was issued. Elite hunters were dispatched. They were told not to speak, not to question, just eliminate the human. Back in the tunnels, the human and the girl moved quietly. She led him through back routes no one else knew, through old war ruins, forgotten shrines, places where the council's reach had faded. Everywhere they passed, the sword glowed brighter. It touched ancient doors, and they opened. It lit the faces of silent statues who whispered words long dead. The sword was remembering, and it was teaching him. It wasn't just power. It was knowledge. He began to see patterns in the walls, understand symbols, hear meanings in alien voices he once couldn't. The sword was unlocking the old language. The truth. In a small temple, buried under centuries of dust, they stopped to rest. The girl sat beside him. "What now?" she asked. He looked at the sword, then at her. "This doesn't belong in a cage," he said, "and neither do you." Outside, the footsteps of hunters grew louder, but inside, the flame had just begun to burn. She had always been told to bow, to lower her head, to not speak unless spoken to serve without question. And yet now, here she was standing beside the human who didn't ask her to kneel, didn't order her, didn't even treat her like a thing. He treated her like a person. The temple walls were cracked with time. The floor was covered in broken stones, glowing moss, and shattered glass from a forgotten war. A breeze whispered through the hollow space, carrying echoes of voices long dead. The sword floated silently in the air between them, its light steady, almost calm, like it was watching. The human sat near a fallen pillar, breathing slowly. His body was still sore, his mind full of questions. The silver-eyed slave girl, who had no name they cared to remember, watched him with quiet wonder. "Why did you free me?" she asked. The human looked up. "Because you were chained." "But everyone's chained here," she said softly. "No one ever stops to notice." She told him things as they hid in the temple, how she was taken from her village as a child, how her parents were sold to different owners, how she was beaten for speaking too loud or looking too proud. But the worst pain was being invisible. To them, she didn't exist. She was background noise, a tool. "But the sword saw me," she whispered. "The moment you touched it, it saw me." Tears welled in her eyes. The human didn't say anything. He just held out his hand. Not to command, but to invite. She took it. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. Suddenly, the temple walls shook. A sound, low and metallic, rumbled through the ground. The girl's eyes widened. "They found us." From the cliffs above, black ships appeared, like vultures circling a dying world. Armored hunters in dark suits dropped down, each one faster and colder than any living thing. Had no faces, just visors and weapons that pulsed with deadly energy. The lead hunter raised a command baton. "Surrender the weapon." The human stood slowly. The sword floated into his hand again, without effort. It hummed, brighter than ever. "It's not a weapon," he said. "Not for you." They opened fire. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was something different. The human didn't strike. He didn't charge. He simply stood his ground. The sword moved on its own, blocking lasers, bending light, shielding the girl. Every time he thought of protecting her, the sword reacted. It knew his heart. It wasn't about power. It was about purpose. The hunters fell one by one, not dead, just stunned, disarmed, confused. Their own weapons turned against them. Their own armor melted from inside. And when the last one collapsed, the sword dimmed. As if it was satisfied, the girl stepped forward. The hunters groaned at her feet. She looked up at the human. "They're afraid of you." "No," he said, breathing hard. "They're afraid of change." That night, others came, not soldiers, not leaders. But the broken. The forgotten. Slaves with bruises, workers with missing limbs, children too tired to cry. They had heard the stories. They had seen the light rise from the council tower. They had followed the whispers. And now they saw him, not in gold, not on a throne, but kneeling beside a small fire, sharing food with the girl. He stood up slowly as the crowd approached. He could feel their fear, their pain, their hope. One by one, they bowed. He stepped back, startled, but the girl turned and said, loud enough for all to hear, "He freed me, not with force, but with care. He doesn't need us to kneel. We bow not because we must, but because we choose." And then she was the first to kneel again, not in fear, but in respect, not because she was less, but because she saw greatness in someone who didn't ask for it. The others followed, not just to him, but to the flame that had returned, to the Sword that chose kindness. From above, the stars seemed to blink brighter that night, as if something ancient was watching and smiling. The arena was silent. Tens of thousands of aliens sat in rising rows, eyes fixed on a small figure at the center. The ground beneath him was cracked stone. The air was heavy with fear. The human stood alone, no armor, no crown, just dust on his clothes, and a glowing sword in his hand. Above him, the High Council watched from their golden balconies, their faces hard and cold. Today was meant to be a lesson, a warning. Show them what happens when the weak disobey, one counselor hissed. Make him kneel, said another. They called it the trial of bending. An ancient tradition. One challenger, one champion. Winner walks free. Loser never walks again. The gates opened with a roar of steam. Out stepped the council's champion, a beast twice the size of the human, covered in dark steel, horns curling like blades. His name was Corvex, a living weapon forged in biolabs. He had never lost. He had never spoken. He just destroyed. The crowd screamed his name. The human didn't flinch. He didn't even raise the sword. The girl was somewhere in the crowd, hidden in slave rags, hands over her mouth. She could barely breathe. She had begged him to escape, to run, to hide, but he had looked at her and said only 4 words. They must see truth. Corvex charged. The arena shook. Dust flew. The champion's metal fists slammed toward the human's head, but the sword moved not like a weapon, but like a whisper. It curved just enough to redirect the blow. Then again. And again. The human didn't attack. He only defended. The crowd began to murmur. They had expected screams, blood, violence. Instead, they saw grace. Corvex grew angry. He bellowed, striking faster, harder. Still the human didn't fall. Still. He didn't strike. Still. He didn't kneel. Then something strange happened. The champion paused. He looked down at his own fists, shaking. At the human, calm, breathing, unafraid. And for the first time, in front of the whole galaxy, Corvex dropped to one knee, not in defeat, but in respect. The entire arena gasped. Up in the council tower, panic broke out. This is impossible. He's corrupted the trial. He must be destroyed now. The order was given. Dozens of drones rose from the walls, aiming their weapons at the human. But before they could fire, the sword pulsed. Not in anger, but in warning. The air turned heavy. Blue light erupted in a dome around him. The drones froze mid-air, systems glitching, sparks flying. Then all at once, they dropped to the ground. Dead silence. The human looked up toward the council balcony. He pointed the sword, not like a threat, but like a question. Why are you afraid of peace? He asked softly. No one answered. They couldn't, because deep inside, they already knew. They had ruled through fear, through division, through silence. And this man, this human with no title, no army, had broken it all by refusing to kneel. In the lower city, slaves watched the broadcast on cracked screens. In hidden tunnels, rebels cheered. In dark mines, tired workers looked up and whispered. He stood. He didn't bow. Maybe we don't have to either. The girl rushed back to the temple ruins that night. The human was already there, cleaning dust off the ancient carvings. You did it, she said, still breathless. You made him kneel. He looked up slowly. No, he replied. He chose to. He held out his hand again. She didn't take it this time. Instead, she walked beside him, not above, not below. Beside. And somewhere deep within the ancient stone, a second sword lit up. Asterisk. They had no names, no birth records, no homes. Just calloused hands, tired eyes, and chains that had grown so old they felt like skin. They were the forgotten scattered across mining pits, cleaning halls, loading docks, and waste fields. They had been silenced so long, most had forgotten how it felt to speak their own names. Until now, until a whisper spread like fire in dry grass. He stood, and the sword followed him. He didn't kneel, so why should we? In a cave city beneath the molten cliffs of Varthus 9, a worker paused during his shift. The monitor on the wall had once shown council propaganda. Now it showed grainy footage of a man standing still as drones fell from the sky. A human, alone, holding a glowing sword. The worker turned to his crew, alien men and women with scarred hands and hopeless eyes, and said, "I want to stand too." In the broken colony of Eator, a slave boy found courage for the first time. He walked into his master's room, looked him in the eyes, and said, "I saw the man who glowed. I am not a tool. I am alive." The master raised a hand to strike, but the boy didn't flinch, because he knew something had changed. Back at the ancient temple, the girl stood beside the human. But she was not the same girl who once bowed. Now she wore no chains. Her voice was strong, and in her hand, a second sword. Smaller, silver, newly awakened. The human looked at her with quiet respect. "It chose you," he said. She nodded. "Not because I'm powerful, but because I endured." Together, they had begun to teach others, not to fight for revenge, not to take back with hate, but to rise with truth. The temple had become a place of gathering. From across the stars, the broken came. Former servants, refugees, children born in labor camps. They brought nothing but their stories, and one by one, the ancient halls began to glow again. Old lights turned on. Dead machines came to life. Forgotten languages echoed in the walls. It was as if the temple remembered too. Deep underground, behind a sealed wall, they discovered something incredible. A chamber of armaments, not weapons of war, but tools of healing, protection, and freedom. Shields that responded to emotion. Armor that adapted to fear. The human placed his hand on a panel. It lit up. Ancient symbols swirled to form one phrase. "The flame has returned." Meanwhile, the council panicked. Their spies had vanished. Their hunters refused to return. Their cities were whispering. Too many whispers. And worst of all, entire labor colonies were going silent. Not in death, in choice. They were walking away, refusing commands, standing tall. This cannot continue. One counselor snarled, "Burn the lower worlds. Show them what fear looks like." But someone stood against them. Counselor Sarai, the keeper of ancient knowledge. She stepped forward in the high chamber and said boldly, "You ask for fear. He offered hope. And the people have already chosen." The council ordered her arrested. She smiled and vanished into light. Back in the temple, the humans stood before the gathered crowd. Thousands had come. Some carried wounds, others carried shame. All carried pain. He raised the sword, but not to the sky. To his chest. "I am not your ruler," he said. "I am your mirror." He turned slowly, looking into each face. "You were told you were weak, but you survived. You were told to kneel, but you still stand. This sword did not rise because I am special. It rose because I saw you." Silence. Then the girl stepped forward. She lifted her smaller sword high and said, "We are not broken. We are rising." The crowd answered. Not with shouts, but by lifting their heads and standing together. Across the galaxy, statues fell, chains dropped, banners burned, not from war, but from will. The forgotten were no longer silent. They were becoming flame. A red moon hung above the skies of Valgora. Below it, the last command ship of the Galactic Council approached, its massive shadow stretching across mountains and cities. It wasn't coming to talk. It wasn't coming to threaten. It was coming to erase. Inside the temple, now glowing like a sun beneath the earth, the human stood still, sword in hand, watching the stars shift above through a crack in the ceiling. They had given him many names now. The blade bearer, the one who stands. The flame returned, but to him, none of that mattered. He had made a promise, to a girl with silver eyes, to a crowd who stood in silence, to the forgotten who had found their voice. He wouldn't break it. The girl stood beside him, her smaller sword now bright as starlight. The people behind her were ready not as an army, but as a force of truth. Refugees, children, elders, healers, builders. They had no ships, no fleets, no weapons of war. Only courage. The ground trembled. Above, the sky cracked open. The council's warship revealed its underbelly lined with cannons, glowing in red light. Its voice boomed across the land, "Surrender the sword, or all will burn." The human didn't move. "This is your final warning." Still, he didn't answer. Instead, he did something no one expected. He walked outside, alone. The wind swept dust around him. The sword in his hand dimmed to a soft glow, almost like it was calm. He stepped to the center of an open field and planted the blade into the ground. Then he dropped to one knee, not in fear, not in surrender, but in peace. Behind him, the people followed. One by one, they came out. They didn't raise fists. They didn't run. They stood behind him. Some knelt. Some held hands. Some wept. Not warriors, but witnesses. Inside the ship, the council screamed in confusion. He's surrendering? He mocks us. Fire now. A captain hesitated. But they're unarmed. We said fire. The weapons charged. 1,000 cannons hummed, and then the sword blazed. A wave of light burst from the blade, brighter than the sun. Not fire, not destruction, but memory. The light shot into the sky, into the ship, through metal and steel straight into the minds of the council. And they saw every slave who cried in silence, every child buried beneath factories, every scream ignored, every life broken for power. They saw it all. And in that moment, they broke. Inside the warship, weapons powered down. Systems went dark. The ship groaned, twisted, and gently crashed into a nearby mountain with no explosion. No fire. Silence followed. The sky cleared. Back in the field, the human stood once more. He pulled the sword from the ground, but now it had changed. No longer glowed. Its edges were soft. Its light had faded. It had done its final task. It had chosen, not just him, but all of them. He looked at the people behind him. Some cheered, some cried, some simply stared at the sky. The girl approached, her sword still glowing. She looked at the man who had once been a stranger. What happens now? He smiled gently. Now we build. Years passed. The council dissolved. The old ways fell. New cities rose, designed by the broken, the bold, the kind. And in the center of the valley where it all began, a new monument stood, not of a man, but of two swords, planted in the earth, side by side. Beneath them, carved in 100 languages, he did not kneel, so we stood. And when we stood, the galaxy changed.